The Chicago Bulls get an honorable mention in the listing of most promising rebuilds in the 2024-25 season. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Plus, the Bulls front office get called generational incompetence. We're going to look at those things as well. Plus, an interesting stat when it comes down to Zach LaVine and Coby White as shooters in the NBA, how it can help them pair next to Josh Giddey. All that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content today, y'all. And so before we start, I started a new thing, but trying to figure out how to crack shorts, right? So if you're on the YouTube side, you know that shorts have become a big thing on YouTube. And so the series that we're going to do on shorts, both here and at Bear Central, is called One Reason Why. And the first video that we have is just a 1-minute video going over one reason why on the topic. And this first video was one reason why Zach LaVine is going to have a bounce back year in 2024-25. So make sure you guys check that out as well. Let me know what you feel about that content. We're trying to add a little bit of extra layer here to things around the Chi-Town Sports Central Network. But with that said, let's get into this content that we have. So the Chicago Bulls, in Grant Hughes' article enlisting the most promising rebuilds, Chicago Bulls got an honorable mention. They did not get listed out the top 5, but they were right outside that top 5. That may be a little surprising for some Bulls fans, right? And we'll get into kind of the negatives so far, but the fact that, the people are looking at the Bulls and saying, hey, they're starting something that could be promising here, right? In the article, they point out getting Josh Giddey at 21 years old and how the room he has for growth. We already know that as well. Now, they do also mention that one of the things that are limiting them in this rebuild that they're going through, and we'll talk about something here in a second, is the fact that they still have Zach LaVine's contract, of course, and Nikola Vucevic, which is something a lot of Bulls fans share, right? Me, myself, I've hesitated to call this really a rebuild, right? I always say kind of pseudo rebuild or retooling when it comes down to it. And, that it comes down to the way that I look at it is that, yes, the Bulls did tear down their roster and that they went considerably younger. They got rid of the monotony on this team and they finally picked a direction because it just wasn't working with the core that they had, right? But as long as Nikola Vucevic and Zach LaVine are still on this roster, without really you can't really even call it a foregone conclusion that either one will be traded for sure, right? You dropped a video last night on the trade rumor around Nikola Vucevic going to the Golden State Warriors in a rumored deal. But, when it comes down to it, I still struggle with, is this a rebuild or is it just a major retooling? With Zach LaVine still on this roster, and the fact of the matter is he could still end the season on this roster, is this a full rebuild? And that's just the question that I have there, right? There's no doubt that the Bulls have made progress. We started going into a direction where we're clearly not tanking, right? We're not a tanking team. We're also not the team that's necessarily fighting tooth and nail to hold on to a play-in berth, which is what the Bulls have done the last few years, right? And so this team still sits in a place of a limbo. Now, not as bad of a limbo. The Bulls are in one of the worst spots that you can have a franchise in the last couple of years as far as just being real middle of the pack, not going to have a great draft pick. You're going to make the play-in, sure, but where does that lead you? You didn't have your own first-round picks two out of those years, right? So, it was a much darker place than what it is now. Now, the Bulls are still kind of in a limbo in a lot of ways. When you break it down, just the fact that we still clearly aren't a playoff team. I know some Bulls fans hold out hope, and I've talked to a couple of you guys in the comment section, hold out hope that this team can be more towards 40 wins. I wish I could be there with you guys. This team isn't quite bad enough to completely bottom out, right? So they still sit in this place where we're going to have this team that is still trying to win basketball games, which is good for the growth and development of your young guys that you have on this roster, that they're still competing and fighting for something. And then once that San Antonio Spurs pick is settled, then, wherever the Bulls sit, let's say that they are this young team that has some promise, is playing a better brand of offense, but just isn't getting out the play-in. But then you have a lottery pick, and then you use those lottery picks hopefully to draft well, and you're adding to your team, hoping that one of those guys you're still adding young talent to your team while you're going on this path of being younger, right? And so, that's where the Bulls are getting to. Also, like we talked about, the financial flexibility that's coming. Even if Zach LaVine stays on this roster, the Bulls team is set up to have some good financial flexibility over the next 2 to 3 years. And so, the long-term outlook is a lot more positive than had they doubled down on this core. But I still at times struggle to call this thing a rebuild. They've made progress. They've moved forward. And you got to give them credit for that. You got to give them big credit for that. But at the end of the day, until Zach LaVine or Nikola Vucevic are moved, right, it's hard to call it a full rebuild for myself. And I can only speak for me. I know some people look at it and say, hey, as soon as you moved off of DeMar DeRozan, that made it a rebuild because of how important he was to your team. And listen, I may not agree, but I can understand that mindset of having on it, right? And I think ultimately it just comes down to the thing that I keep looking at, and it goes back to this front office for me. How well now do you take advantage of this new opportunity, this new direction that you've gotten for your team? How well do you now do as a front office over this course of this new direction? That's the thing for me. Don't give out bad contracts anymore, right? Maintain your flexibility and as many of your assets, and that's what we talked about in yesterday's episode. I'm giving the Bulls credit for now because, as we know, the Bulls things can change, is that they haven't given up any more long-term assets to come off of this core. Yes, they didn't acquire the ones that we wanted them to acquire that they could have gotten if they decided to do it early and things like that, but they have not given up the long-term assets either. And that's one of the keys here, is that they haven't done that. And I would say this, if it takes moving off any draft picks to move Vooch, you keep Vooch on this roster. That's just my personal opinion. I know we talked about last night that rumor deal from the Warriors, which would have gotten you Moses Malone, Kevon Looney, and Gary Payton II. It's just a lot more guards. Come on, man. But at least you're not giving up any assets, and all those players become free agents at the end of this season. So there's some understanding there. You're adding more flexibility in one way. You may not be getting draft picks, but you're not giving up any flexibility, right? That's the key thing with this Bulls and this front office, is that whatever you do, stop giving up your future flexibility. Stop giving up your future assets. We are not at this place where we can give up future assets. If you are the top 4 in the Eastern Conference, cool. You can give up some future assets because you're so close there that if you're giving up those assets to achieve, okay, hopefully you're in the range of being able to win a title at that point. The problem with what this Bulls team did when they initially built this core was they gave up future assets for a core that the top end of that time was you were hoping for a playoff berth. You don't want to do that. And so, the Bulls, to get back on topic here, to be listed as one of the honorable mention right outside the top 5 of teams that have the most promising rebuilds. I think that makes sense when you look at this Bulls team. Josh Giddey, Manas Bucelis, right there is 2 players that, while yes, flawed, you still want to see develop and how they're going to grow their game. Those are 2 really good pieces to start off any rebuild with. The fact that you're adding to that still with Patrick Williams, who's still, like I've said before, I know a lot of Bulls fans are down on Pat, but he's shown an ability at the bare minimum to be a solid starter for the rest of his career. But outside of that as well, you still got Coby White, who definitely is promising. Yeah, you got to pay him soon, but definitely. You got Ayo Dosunmu. That's definitely promising, right? You brought in Jalen Smith. Okay, right? So, and still guys that we still don't know what they're going to turn into, and Julian Phillips and Dalen Terry. Still got Adama Sanogo down there, who's on a 2-way, probably going to be down in the G League. So the Bulls have some promise here, but it's the unrealized potential in a lot of those pieces. Kobe still has to show that he can do it again, right? But I won't call him unrealized potential because he did realize it last season. We just got to see if it's going to be consistent. The other guys, we got to see what they're going to be, who they're going to be, and how consistent they're going to be at being those players. But it is promising. But to look at this list, so the other teams mentioned in the honorable mentions with the Chicago Bulls were the Utah Jazz, which, they got Keontae George, Taylor Hendricks, Walker Kessler still there, who they can still get picks back for if they do look to trade him. They got Larry Market in there. They got players like Jordan Clarkson, John Collins, even Colin Sexton that they could move to get even more assets if needed. So look at that, right? Then there was the Chicago Bulls, the Toronto Raptors, the Charlotte Hornets. Those were your honorable mentions. I think the Charlotte Hornets, listen, if LaMelo Ball can stay healthy and pair with Brandon Miller, that's probably going to be a team competing for an 8 seed. Then, as far as the top 5, as far as most promising rebuilds, they have the Brooklyn Nets at number 5. Now, this is going to be a team that loses a lot, but because of that is why they have them marked as promising, because they do have the chance to either get Ace Bailey or Cooper Flagg that's going to help them tremendously heading into next season. They still got Cam Thomas, so I understand why they were listed there. Number 4, the Washington Wizards. Now, if you're looking at SAR and that level, maybe I still need to see more from them. They did get a lot of picks, right? So, it is what it is when it comes down to it, and we'll see what happens with the Wizards. Number 3, the Portland Trailblazers. Like the Portland Trailblazers, I really like Scoot Henderson a lot. They added Donovan Clingan to that team. Still have Shaedon Sharpe there, and they got a lot of pieces that they can trade if need be. So I understand why they listed there. 2, the Detroit Pistons. They got talent. Cade Cunningham does make it a promising rebuild. Make no mistakes about it. But still, I don't necessarily believe a lot in the talent of the Detroit Pistons personally. But they got Jalen Duren. They got Ron Holland. They got Ausar Thompson. So they do have Jaden Ivey still there, right? So they do have some promising young pieces there. And then, of course, number 1, the San Antonio Spurs. You got Wemby. Yeah, your rebuild's the most promising. And that's outside of the other players that they have. Yes, of course they have Wemby, but then they could have three lottery picks next year. That's crazy when you look at that. When you also have other players there that are talented as well. Stephon Castle's there. Devin Vassell's still there. Like, they got players down there. So, yeah, it makes sense. So the Bulls get in an honorable mention among those teams. I'll take that as a win, and we'll see where we go from there. But one of the things over the course of this offseason, and in a recent article as well, the Chicago Bulls were accused of generational incompetence. Generational incompetence. And here's the thing. Yes, I will say absolutely yes. And the reason why I'll say that, as much as I have been, the last couple of episodes talking about what this Bulls front office has done well, giving them credit for the Modest Busila signing, giving them credit for moving off and deciding to move off the core rather than double down and get yourself some financial flexibility going forward, to have all your draft picks other than one for the next few years. I've given them a lot of credit for that. Getting Josh Giddey, who I think has a lot of promise, and I think a lot of Bulls fans are going to turn around on who Josh Giddey is as a prospect by the end of this season. But you still got to look at what this team has done bad over the course of a handful of years. Let's just go back to it. Let's just look at this offseason, right? Not the woulda, coulda, shoulda, we'll get to that. But let's look at this offseason. Because of you hard capping yourself early when you didn't have to, you weren't able to take back Harrison Barnes in a trade, which meant you lost out on the first-round pick swap. That ended up going to the Spurs because they were able to take on Harrison Barnes, a team that just absorbed things in this trade. They were able to get the first-round pick back from it. That is incompetence, right? That just is what it is. The deal to Patrick Williams could be looked at that as well, but you know what I say. You locked in a young player that he's going towards his core. He still has a lot of promise, and you've kind of freed up some of the things ahead of him so that he can now potentially, get more opportunity. You can see what you have in him, right? But then it gets to the things that you missed out on. The DeMar, Alex Caruso, Andre Drummond. Had you just moved on from these pieces at the trade deadline, let's even say 2 of them. Andre Drummond, we already heard, that's 2 second-round picks that you would have got back for Andre Drummond. Is that great? No, but you know what that's better than? Losing him for nothing, and you didn't take on any salary. Again, something you could have done. Alex Caruso, you did get Josh Giddey back for it as well, but getting no first-round picks back from the OKC Thunder, that's, again, I've been able to compartmentalize and separate the not getting picks from the talent of Josh Giddey, so that's how I look at that, but still not getting anything, even some protection. You couldn't get a couple of seconds, nothing. That is, and keep in mind, Alex Caruso, yes, he's a free agent at the end of this year, but that is a OKC Thunder team that added Isaiah Hartenstein, that added Alex Caruso. They're going for a title. You could have got something. You should have went into that saying, I'm not leaving here with something. So, that plays a part into it as well, right? And then, of course, you have, the overarching thing of Jerry Reinsdorf, which I don't think Jerry Reinsdorf affects the day-to-day as much as some Bulls fans do. I think that Jerry Reinsdorf has that mandate of we are not going to pay the luxury tax, but a lot of teams didn't pay the luxury. 22 teams last year didn't pay the luxury tax, so I'm not going to hold that just against the Bulls. And guess what? All of those 22 teams didn't suck. So, it is what it comes down to it. So, but also the way that the Bulls have just constantly, this front office is always a year back from their assets. And that is something. The Bulls have moved forward, right? They've gotten something done as far as you finally have picked a direction. You finally have moved off this roster that was just struggling to hold on to a play-in. And you get some credit for that. But ultimately, still, you have so much left that you got to do, and it just is what it is. You could have been further along, even in this going through this rebuild, had you just made the decision early. And I know people are going to say, but Haize, there's a mandate from the front office that said we had to contend. Every insider that's actually close to this Bulls team, that's traveled with this Bulls team, has said that was the first time they heard of that when that rumor came out. Now, that doesn't mean it's not true, but let's not take it as 100% gospel either, right? Because that's not necessarily what we've seen from Jerry Reinsdorf either. Jerry has been a person who really has not cared about that, but it is what it is, right? So at the end of the day, it comes down to when you are operating a team and your team has been mediocre for as long as it has, had less and less return on investments than what you've done, yeah, you're going to get labeled as incompetent. Generational incompetence, I mean, that depends on how you look and survey other things around the league, but, we'll ultimately see, man. And like I said, hopefully this front office has learned from its mistakes, because if they haven't, man, we have barely begun to see the dark days of the Chicago Bulls. If they didn't learn from these mistakes, oh, man, listen, it's about to be dark around here, man. So, C-Dub's already around here, so it's kind of dark anyway. Nonetheless, so that's the thought process there. Let's get into an article that I thought was really, really cool. This one, again, Elias Schuster and Kirk Goldsberry, who actually released the chart, but, it is what it is there. Looking at, there's one thing with Josh Giddey, right, that we've talked about is him as a playmaker and how he generates open shots. There are some Bulls fans that don't really understand what generating open shots are and how important that is to a team. But here's the thing. I've said it before. Josh Giddey is in the 90th percentile of generating open shots for his teammates. And when you look at performance since 2020, as far as jump shooters in the league, the Chicago Bulls have had two of the best of them. Zach LaVine has shot in 38.6% on 7.5 three-point attempts per game since 2020. Over that same time, Coby White's basically right behind him at 37.1%, taking 6.1 attempts per game. Listen, that is two very high-volume threats in that backcourt, and Josh Giddey, being the playmaker that he is hopefully going to get the most out of that. Coby White and Zach LaVine are really good shooters. Now, Coby White hasn't been necessarily the best on catch and shoot, where Zach LaVine has, and that's something that we're going to look to try to take advantage of or grow in Coby's game, is how can he grow as a catch and shoot player. But again, are the Bulls going to force that? We'll see, because he's, if he ends up being that he's just better with being on ball, that's where Billy Donovan and this coaching staff and the Bulls are going to have to make some tough decisions, right? But when you look at that as well, is that when you have Coby White coming out what he did last season, when you have Josh Giddey's playmaking and able to try to help this team become a more modern offense, Zach LaVine and Coby White are going to be big parts of that. I'll even say go to Ayo Dosunmu and the growth that he's had shooting-wise as well over the last year. If he can do those things, it's going to help this Bulls team a lot. Patrick Williams, what he is as a shooter. This Bulls team has been terrible in shooting, and that's one of the things under Billy Donovan. When you look at the fact that the Bulls have had two of the best jump shooters in the league over the last handful of years in Coby White, and it goes back to like Billy Donovan not utilizing player talent always the best. He hasn't always used that the best, and that is something you always have to look at, is that how your coach uses your talent. Shout out to Winton Mahorn on this one. I'm always going to give love to Winton Mahorn. The Bulls have been 17th or worse in three-point attempts per game over the last year. Now, again, you need more than Zach LaVine and Coby White to be a solid three-point shooting team. You got DeMar, who operates primarily in the mid-range. You got Nikola Vucevic, who's been out there jacking up threes, hitting it at a terrible percentage. Patrick Williams is scared to take shots at time, even though he hits it at a decent percentage. Ayo and Alex Caruso last year took leaps shooting the three ball more consistently. But again, we lost Zach LaVine, a good three-point shooter in that time. So I'm not saying that just because Coby and Zach LaVine have been really good three-point shooters over this time period, that you just automatically, that means that the Bulls should just be this great three-point shooting team. I'm not saying that. But again, when you talk about not running players to the best of their ability, the Bulls in 2020-21 were 17th in three-point attempts and 13th in three-point percentage. It's actually pretty good, right? That was 34 three-point attempts per game in 2020-21, 37% hitting it from three. Then we were 30th in three-point attempts in 2021-22 at 28.8, and 4th in three-point shooting percentage at 36.9. Then we were 30th again in 2022-23, taking another 28.9 attempts per game, hitting that at a 36.1% clip. And then last year, 26th in the league in three-point attempts. We got up to 32, but we were 20th in three-point shooting percentage, our worst under Billy Donovan at 35.8%. So what does that mean? That means that this team three-point shooting is such an integral part of being a successful basketball team. There were so many games last season that the Bulls actually had a better field goal shooting percentage than their team, but because their team took threes, that it created such a gap that the Bulls just weren't able to overcome because we didn't take three-point shots. Now, the question is, how much better has the Bulls team gotten as the three-point shooting team? When you look at it, Josh Giddey, not a three-point threat. He's gotten better at shooting threes every year, and he's gotten better at taking open three-pointers as well over that time period, but not great. Coby White, Zach LaVine, solid three-point shooters, especially Zach LaVine in catch and shoots. Coby White more off ball. So you're getting that now. Patrick Williams at the 4, a solid three-point shooter. We just needed him to take more. And then you got Vooch, another non-three-point shooter. Off the bench, you got Ayo Dosunmu, who if his growth last season ends up being consistent this season, you're going to see much better three-point shooting coming off that bench from Ayo Dosunmu. And then the rest of the Bulls players are really a crapshoot. Miles Bucelis, while a good three-point shooter in high school, wasn't in Summer League, wasn't with the G League Ignite last year. So you're not really looking at him to be a good three-point shooter yet. He has solid mechanics, but not. Jalen Smith, solid three-point shooter. He can definitely stretch the floor. He adds a dynamic we did not have last year with Andre Drummond. Torrey Craig, solid. More so as a role player, but he can be a solid three-point shooter over the course of his career. Not great, but okay. And then it comes down to like Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry, Arnold Patim, Chris Duarte maybe, right? So you're looking to see what those players can bring three-point shooting-wise to help the Chicago Bulls team. But make no mistake about it, we could be going into the 5th year in a row where three-point shooting is a deficit for the Chicago Bulls team. And that's where you have to look at coaching and you have to look at the front office. And I guess we'll see where that leaves us. But let me know your guys' thoughts on all that down below. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.